The billionaire's son walked into the cafe and ordered a $5 meal like everyone else. Class difference, humility, secret identity. I remember that morning vividly. The hiss of the espresso machine, the comforting hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft sunlight filtering through the dusty cafe windows. It was an ordinary Tuesday at Maggie's Corner Cafe, a small place tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, where the regulars came for cheap coffee and warmth that couldn't be bought elsewhere. I'd been working there for 3 years, pouring coffee, wiping counters, and pretending not to overhear the stories people told. I'd learned that cafes aren't just about caffeine, they're about confession. People said things here they'd never say anywhere else. Around 10 a.m., the bell above the door jingled, and that's when I saw him, a young man. Maybe mid-20s in a simple gray hoodie and faded jeans. There was something off about him, though. He moved with a strange kind of quiet confidence, not arrogance, but the calm of someone used to having control over everything. "Morning," I said, offering my practiced smile. He smiled back, polite, reserved. "Morning. Just a coffee and a breakfast plate, please." I nodded and rang it up. "That'll be $5. He handed me a crisp bill. For a second I thought nothing of it. But when I glanced closer, the bill wasn't crumpled or old like most cash that passed through this place. It looked fresh from the bank. I didn't think too hard about it. Rich people didn't come here, not in this part of town. As he sat down near the window, I noticed how he looked around, studying the peeling paint, the crooked blinds, the old jukebox that hadn't worked since 2012. There was something in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe nostalgia. When I brought his plate, eggs, toast, and black coffee, he looked up and said softly, "You make this yourself?" I chuckled. "Yeah, every morning. Why, you judging my plating skills?" He smiled faintly. "No, just reminds me of something. My dad used to make breakfast like this when I was a kid." That small comment lingered longer than it should have. There was something gentle about him, like he carried a sadness he didn't talk about. He ate quietly, and when he was done, he thanked me, genuinely, before leaving a $5 tip. On a $5 meal. "Generous," said Tom, our cook, peering out from the kitchen. "Who tips like that around here?" I shrugged. Maybe someone who knows what $5 means. But the man came back the next day. And the next? Always around the same time, always ordering the same thing. He never said much, but he listened. To the old men arguing about politics. To the kids sharing fries after school. To the single mom grading papers in the corner. One morning, I finally asked, "You live around here?" He hesitated. "Not exactly. I'm staying nearby for a while. Needed a break." "From what?" I asked teasingly. He looked out the window, his jaw tightening. Everything. Something about the way he said it made my chest ache. That day, I noticed a group of local teens come in, loud, laughing, the kind that never bought anything more than a soda. One of them bumped into the man's table, spilling his coffee. "Watch where you're going, dude," the man said, but his tone stayed calm. The teenager smirked. "Relax, man. It's just coffee." The air shifted. I expected him to lose his cool, but instead he sighed, grabbed some napkins, and cleaned the spill himself. I caught his eye as he stood to leave. He smiled faintly, as if embarrassed. "Some people just need to grow up, huh?" I nodded, but inside I was curious. Who was this man who carried himself with such quiet composure? Later that afternoon, a black car stopped outside the cafe. A man in a suit came in, scanning the room. His eyes landed on the stranger, and his entire demeanor changed. He straightened, respectful. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "your father's been trying to reach you." "He's worried." My heart skipped. "Sir?" The stranger sighed. "Tell him I'm fine, Henry. I just needed time to think." The man in the suit nodded stiffly. "Understood, sir. But your father insists you attend the board meeting tomorrow." The stranger gave a tired smile. "Tell him the board can wait. My breakfast here is more important." And with that, the suited man left, leaving me stunned. When I brought his check over, I couldn't help but ask, "Board meeting?" "You're not exactly a local truck driver, are you?" He chuckled. "Not quite." Then after a pause, he added, "My name's Ethan. Ethan Caldwell." The name hit me like a jolt. Caldwell. As in Caldwell Industries, the billion-dollar corporation that practically owned half the city. I tried to hide my shock. "So, you're that Caldwell?" He nodded slowly. "My father, yes. Not me. Then why are you here? You could eat anywhere. Why a $5 meal here?" He looked around the cafe, his eyes softening. "Because this feels real. People here don't talk about profit margins. They talk about life, about losing jobs, raising kids, making rent." I needed to remember what that felt like. For a moment, the entire room faded. It was just him and me sitting across from each other. A billionaire's son and a waitress with coffee-stained hands. Two people from entirely different worlds, meeting in the quiet middle of it all. "Before leaving," he said, You know, the eggs could use a bit more salt, I laughed. So you are hard to please, he smiled, tipping his cup slightly. Try harder then. And that was how it began. An unlikely friendship that would change both our lives in ways neither of us could have predicted. But I didn't know then what was coming. The news, the scandal, and the choice Ethan would soon have to make. One that would test not just his humility, but his heart. The following week, Ethan didn't come by. Not once. The cafe felt oddly quieter without him. I'd grown used to his steady presence, his gentle nod when I poured coffee, his thoughtful silence while others complained about life. By day 5, I couldn't help it. I Googled Ethan Caldwell. There he was. Photos of him in tuxedos, attending galas, shaking hands with people in suits worth more than our entire cafe. But that week's headlines made my heart sink. Caldwell Industries faces allegations of corruption. CEO's son reportedly abandons family duties amidst scandal. I stared at the screen. Ethan hadn't been escaping boredom. He'd been escaping chaos. He finally showed up on Friday, wearing the same hoodie, but his eyes looked heavier. I poured his usual coffee without asking. You look like you've been through a storm, I said softly. He gave a small, broken laugh. Yeah, that's one way to put it. I didn't press. People who carry heavy things don't need questions. They need space. After a few minutes, he spoke. My father built an empire on numbers. I grew up thinking money fixed everything. But it doesn't fix guilt. Or silence. I leaned on the counter. You don't strike me as someone chasing money. He shook his head. I'm not. But everyone around me does. That's the problem. For a moment, I saw not a billionaire's son, but a young man terrified of becoming what he was born into. Then he said something that stayed with me. You know what's crazy? The happiest I've been in months was eating eggs that cost $5 in this place. I smiled sadly. Maybe happiness isn't about what's on your plate, but who you become while eating it. He grinned faintly. You should put that on the menu. That night after closing, he stayed to help me wipe tables. It felt natural, almost easy. He wasn't Mr. Caldwell here. He was just Ethan. The sound of the rain tapping on the windows made everything slow, almost cinematic. Do you ever think about leaving this town? He asked suddenly. Every day, I admitted. But I never do. My mom's here. She's sick. Someone has to keep the lights on. He nodded, his expression softening. You remind me of someone I used to know and my mother. She was kind. Real. Before all of this. He gestured vaguely. Before we turned into headlines. The vulnerability in his voice made me ache. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to the cafe door. My name was written on it, Lena. Inside was a check for $50,000, my breath caught. Along with it, a note for your mother's treatment. Consider it a thank you for reminding me that people still matter more than profit. You see, my hands trembled. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or insulted. Money, even with good intentions, always complicated things. When Ethan walked in later that day, I confronted him. You shouldn't have done this, I said, voice shaking. He looked confused. Why not? You need help. I have the means. That's not the point, I interrupted. I didn't talk to you because of what you could give me. I talked to you because you were human. For the first time, he looked truly speechless. Then he nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. You're right. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make things right somehow. You already did, I whispered. You showed up. He smiled faintly, folded the check back into his pocket and said, then maybe I'll just keep showing up. And he did. Day after day, week after week. Sometimes with stories about the city skyline, sometimes in silence, but always with that same gentle humility that made people forget who he was. Then, one morning he came in wearing a suit again. Clean, crisp and unfamiliar. I froze mid-pour. You're leaving, aren't you? He nodded. My father's stepping down. The board wants me to take over. They think I can fix what's broken. And can you? I asked quietly. He smiled, a small bittersweet smile. Maybe not fix it, but I can make sure it remembers its soul. Before leaving, he pulled out a small notebook and handed it to me. I started writing again, he said. This cafe reminded me what stories are for. I flipped it open. Sketches, small reflections, fragments of conversations we'd shared. Promise me something, I said. Don't forget where you came from, or who you were when you sat in that corner booth. He looked at me, eyes steady. I won't. That's where I finally learned what being rich actually means. He reached for his wallet, then paused. You know what? This one's on me, I said, pushing his hand away. He laughed softly. You'll make me go broke with kindness. Then you'll finally fit in around here. He smiled, that same quiet, grateful smile, and walked out. The bell above the door chimed one last time. Months passed. The cafe carried on, same faces, same chatter, but his absence lingered like a song that wouldn't fade. I saw his face on TV once. Ethan Caldwell, new CEO of Caldwell Industries, pledges to rebuild company culture from the ground up, focusing on fairness and people. But it wasn't until Christmas Eve that he came back. Dressed simply again, holding a paper cup of coffee. He sat at his old booth, looked around, and said softly, "Still feels like home." I smiled, pouring him another. "Some things don't need fixing." He looked at me then, the same way he had that first morning, curious and human. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes the richest people aren't the ones with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones humble enough to walk into a $5 cafe and remember what being alive feels like. The story of Ethan Caldwell wasn't about money or class. It was about rediscovering humanity, one cup of coffee at a time. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Tales Story House for more stories that remind us that kindness and humility still exist.